Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 9th of September 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined by live video Skype link by David Scott with Northern Exposure and particular focus on matters north of the border. Brief comment on the weather. It's a bit grey and gloomy here in Plymouth, though I think the weekend is going to be better. We're told it's sun and clouds in Greece. In fact, somebody has said the former nation state of Greece. So obviously the political agenda coming to the fore there. And we've got a bit of rain in Perth, and I think it's dull in Manchester, if I picked that up correctly. So there we are. And where do we go from here?
Education.
Education.
Or lack of it. Because, of course, there's clearly increasingly a case for home education because of the standard of British education. And we're, in fact, heading to make things absolutely worse. So Theresa May has announced her schools revolution. She's going to allow any school that feels like it to become a grammar school. But, of course, in order to get to that point, currently existing grammar schools need reform. And I think one of the key points out of this is that any school wanting to become a new grammar school or any existing grammar school that wants to expand needs to be taking a proportion of pupils from what are being described as lower income households, so that selective education is not reserved for those with the means to move into a catchment area or pay for tuition to pass the test. Now, of course, the truth of the matter is that grammar schools do take people from lower income brackets at the moment. I happen to know that for a fact in Plymouth, at least. But the fact is that they're not obliged to. It's not a requirement. However, putting a requirement, a quota on it, is going to force grammar schools to take children that haven't passed the 11 plus or haven't met a certain educational standard. What would be the effect of that, Brian, do you think?
I think they've always been desperate to destroy grammar schools, Mike, and I think they haven't been able to do it openly because that originally produced too much hostility from people who saw through it. So what they're going to do is the creeping attack, which is you've got to get a little bit in, change the working structure, the philosophy of the school, and then you can move on. Ultimately, what they want are all academy schools, where, of course, the agenda can be completely set with the school after 1 year, I believe it is, and commercial interests will be educating your children.
Absolutely. So let's look at see what the cold-blooded Theresa May had to say about this. She said, we're going to build a country that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. So if she's saying that, we know that your intention is to do the exact opposite. A fundamental part of that is having schools that give every child the best start in life, regardless of their background. David, have you got any thoughts on this?
Well, I think the move towards home education is going to gather pace because we're seeing in so many different ways that there is a hidden charge to allowing the state to educate your children, that it's been increasingly used as a means of controlling how people think and altering the viewpoint of the next generation. And it's not pursuing education and knowledge for its own sake, and it's not maximising the talents of the individual. And for that reason, people are going to vote with their feet. In terms of government policy, what we're seeing in Scotland is more and more centralisation, and we're seeing the equivalent of academy schools being used to eliminate the local authority and ensure that the relationship is direct with the central government.
Well, with academies, of course, that relationship is becoming direct with corporate interests, which is potentially even worse, isn't it?
Anything that uses the coercive power of the state to generate income and then uses that to distribute that income to what we would term public services is a huge threat to liberty.
Yeah. Okay. Now, your first story, you wanted to discuss 9/11 because, of course, Sunday is the anniversary, and you wanted to highlight architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Yes, this is getting to the very heart of the matter on 9/11. The explanation that we've had from the official sources, from NIST, from FEMA, as to what actually happened to the towers has always ignored the actual collapse. They terminate their analysis with statements such as, and global collapse then ensued, and don't explain how this ever happened. Now, any questions on this were referred to a paper originally written by Blatant and Zhu, Blatant being the main author. And the first version of this paper was actually submitted the day after 9/11, so he was very quick in producing a paper, but there were serious errors in it, and it is the only explanation for the failure of the buildings that is endorsed by those supporting the official story. So what we have here is an analysis by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, looking at the telltale indicator that there was in fact controlled demolition that day, and that's free fall acceleration. Now the issue here is that all forces occur in pairs, that if you have the large force necessary to cause failure in the lower part of the building being exerted by the falling upper section, then the same force is applied in the other direction on that falling body, and that means that that falling body will decelerate rapidly at many times g. There is, in other words, a jolt. There has to be a jolt. If there's no jolt and no slowing of the falling part of the building, there is no force generated. If there's no force generated, there's nothing to cause collapse of the structure below, which was very robust and able to take many times the weight of the building directly above. Now, what this paper shows is that there was no jolt, that you had free fall acceleration. The implication of this is there was nothing in the way. And the only explanation as to why there was nothing in the way is controlled demolition. This is the smoking gun. This is the signal that something is extremely wrong with the story we've been told. And it's very good to see architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth getting the message out on this matter. And having been obstructed for many years, in fact, in getting this published in technical journals, it's now starting to get out in that type of format. And 35,000 of these documents have been sent to structural engineers all across America to improve awareness there, because a recent survey found that more than half of structural engineers in the States didn't actually know that 3 buildings collapsed on 9/11, not 2.
And you wanted to highlight this article from Paul Craig Roberts, "The Tide is Turning, the official story is now the conspiracy theory." And you made the point that he was citing this report here called Techniques of Control, well, from Europhysics News, and it's really highlighting the techniques of controlled demolition. And the quote is, "The evidence points overwhelmingly to the conclusion that all 3 World Trade Center buildings were destroyed by controlled demolition."
Yes, this is part of the same body of work, and we're seeing that despite all the efforts to keep this viewpoint silent and not allow it into the technical press, not allow it into journals of record, that the message is getting out there. It will not go away. I've personally spoken to people at the very top of the structural engineering profession in the very tall building field, and nobody, of course, can answer this question regarding the free fall acceleration, because the only answer is that there was no building there as the upper portion of the structure came down, which means controlled demolition.
Now, just to clarify, you are a professional structural engineer yourself. Are you linked to this to architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth at all?
In a small way, I've signed the petition that's been generated by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and I reviewed that paper before it came out. And my name is on the front cover as one of the structural engineers endorsing the paper as an important and accurate piece of information. I'm not an author, it's simply an interested engineer who wants to get this viewpoint understood.
David, I'll just add in there that basically, of course, this 9/11 is so important because of all the things that followed on, not just the fact that what happened was a lie, but all of the security arrangements that came in, the anti-terrorism actions all followed on as a result of that. So this still remains an absolutely key event which people need to understand properly. And anecdotal story, but a gentleman came in to see me at my home a few days ago, and we were talking general sort of stuff, and then he mentioned 9/11, and I was quite surprised, and I said, "Why are you interested in that?" And he said, "Well, I've sort of been hearing things that the official version was not true." And I said, "Well, I think I have a magazine upstairs, and I believe it is one of the early magazines from that particular group of architects and engineers." So I went and found it and gave it to him, and he took it and he said, "This will be very interesting." And I said, "Again, why are you so interested?" And he said, "Well, actually, I am an engineer, and the more I've started to hear, the more it doesn't stack up." And I just found that very interesting. The man who's a retired, basically, engineer in the West Country here has been hearing enough for him to say that he wants to learn more.
Yes, and not only do most engineers not know the facts of the case, most will not engage with the implications, because the implications are enormous, that we've been lied to, that we're being manipulated as nations into practices and wars and campaigns that are quite the reverse of what they pretend to be. And of course, for people in the United States, we have to remember there are still people being diagnosed with cancers and are dying because of what was actually in the dust on 9/11. So although it's now 15 years ago, it's for some people it's very much part of their current and very grim experience.
Indeed.
Okay. Now, yesterday I spoke to Vanessa Bailey on this program, and if anybody hasn't seen that interview yet, that discussion, please hunt it out and distribute it as far and wide as possible. And one of the things that we mentioned on that was the fact that Netflix has created a documentary on the White Helmets, and they have published a trailer for that documentary on their American YouTube channel. And I'm delighted to say that in the last day or so, there has been a significant response from people that understand that the White Helmets are a branch of al-Nusra, i.e. Al-Qaeda, and the response in both the fact that they're getting so many downvotes on this video and the number of comments and the types of comments that they're getting is incredible. So this is a typical comment: boycott Netflix for supporting an al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda branch, jihadi terrorists. White Helmets are just part-time firefighters of al-Nusra. When there are no fires, they stage propaganda materials or do jihadist terrorist stuff like executions of non-terrorists, making bombs, etc. Many of the people commenting, of course, aren't speaking English as a first language. So you've got to read between the lines, perhaps, in some of the comments. But nonetheless, the response has been quite strong. And I mean, I would say if anybody wants to know more, do watch yesterday's UK Column News programme, and perhaps you might want to leave a comment on that Netflix channel or downvote the video yourselves.
Indeed. Well, let's follow on, because we've just heard David talk about essentially people lying over what happened at 9/11. What was the result of that? Well, massive clampdown on homeland security in America, and then we've seen war after war erupt throughout the Middle East on the back of events. Well, have a look at this man. I encourage you to go online to YouTube. This is Senator Trey Gowdy. I've only just discovered this gentleman, but I was so impressed with the video clips. So somebody has kindly put up a whole series of clips of this man as part of the interrogation of Hillary Clinton and others. But my goodness, he is so thorough, and he is basically saying quite openly, you are lying, you're not telling the truth, this is criminal. American state secrets released by Hillary Clinton as the result of the fact that she was using a private email service. This man is quite remarkable in the clinical way that he is exposing Hillary Clinton and others. So I'd encourage you to go on and have a look, and you can hear firsthand from the people as opposed to secondhand. You can hear firsthand the devious replies from senior United States political people. Well, here he is in another section on Hillary Clinton, and I was just fascinated. If you have a look at her in that picture, I've chosen some words: smug, arrogant, above the law, elitist, sociopath, possibly a psychopath. Remember, she was happy to snigger over the fact that they finally got rid of the leader in Libya, Gaddafi, and this woman was prepared to sit in front of the Senate committee and clearly just lie about the fact she had been handling secure material on a private internet server, which was a direct breach of American rules. And then on Benghazi, which he also talked about, a whole series of lies. Now, this man also took on Susan Rice, basically says the same thing, that she was simply lying about what actually happened in the Benghazi incident. And so I just thought we'd take a little look at this lady, and here she is. So she's security advisor for the White House. But if you read through, it says, of course, that part of her job and work with the United Nations is to promote respect for human rights. So we've got another top official that's simply prepared to sit in front of a congressional committee and to lie about events to do with not only the death of American civilians and military, but lie over the causes of the war and violence in the Middle East. So these are the people ultimately, of course, who were in post around the time of 9/11, also lying, I would guess, Mike.
Indeed. Now, North Korea, of course, another pariah state. Well, they have just apparently let off another nuclear weapons test, and this has the West in apoplectic state. This is Jens Stoltenberg making his statement today on this. Reports about a possible fifth nuclear test conducted today by North Korea are very disturbing. If confirmed, this new provocation is another clear violation of numerous UN Security Council resolutions. So not just in the Middle East, but they would very much like to see trouble in Southeast Asia at the moment as well, because of course, the West and NATO, the World Bank, the IMF, they do not particularly like the eastward-looking strategic direction that many countries are taking at the moment, and perhaps might want to put them off getting too much closer to China.
Indeed, but I'd also point out that that security advisor, Susan Rice, boasts that she's been helping to keep the world free of nuclear weapons and stopping conflict, really. So if she's involved, it's not looking too good on the nuclear front. Well, let's come closer to home, and I'm going to say well done, the Sun, well, partly. This is part of a story that they've got. The Michael Fallon has says there's a cost, a price you pay if you don't intervene and put troops or peacekeepers in much earlier in some of these countries. So here he is talking about Syria. The Sun's headline was actually appalling because they had a little quippy joke, which is making a joke really about the death and suffering in Syria. But here is this vile man, the Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, saying, well, actually, we paid a bit of a price. We didn't get in there fast enough. Well, what's he really talking about? I think he's really saying we didn't get the good terrorists in quick enough. We didn't start causing the trouble fast enough, and therefore we didn't achieve the regime change. That's what he's really saying. But this is very, very nasty, cynical stuff by British politicians. And let's bring in former General Dannatt, known as a great Christian, I believe. And he's said in the same article, we must always be careful about our Western presence, as it's always far better if troops from the region can do the job. So what does he really mean? Well, he means we need to use other nations as the cannon fodder for our particular objectives. I read some of this morning, and even though I had quite a strong cup of coffee, I find this utterly repulsive stuff. These people are running a private agenda. None of this action is for the benefit of Britain or the British people. It goes through the political scene, it goes through the top levels of the military, what a thing to say. We've created mayhem in Afghanistan, Iraq, in Syria, in Libya. And, well, it would have been better if we could have got more of their troops killed to follow this agenda.
Well, of course, what Dannett is expressing there is the gangs and counter-gangs policy of Kitson. And we've mentioned Kitson's book, Gangs and Counter-Gangs, several times before. And of course, that's about his experience with the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. And his point was that, you know, by running the gangs and counter-gangs in the way that they did, I think they lost about 30 British personnel as opposed to 20,000 Kenyan personnel. So this is a long-standing British policy of just putting people at each other's throats, letting them fight amongst themselves while the British sit back and watch and smirk, I suppose.
Indeed. And David, before we bring you in, I'll just follow through with a quick sequence of slides here. But let's think really. Mike and Vanessa Beeley did a fantastic job yesterday talking about what was really going on in Syria. And of course, the game was and still is regime change. The US and UK have decided they don't want Assad in power. He's got to go. But thanks to the bravery of Vanessa and those members of the House of Lords, real information is coming out. And when I watched the news, which I didn't do until yesterday evening, the picture of this little boy born without arms and then loses the greater part of his legs as a result of IEDs in this conflict. Who is responsible? Well, real people are responsible. People like David Cameron, of course, he was desperate to get troops on the ground. He was desperate to get aircraft in, bombing largely the civilian population. What was really his driving force? Well, let's remind ourselves that, of course, David Cameron was the man who said that his allegiance to Israel was unbreakable. And at the time, the UK columns said, well, this is interesting because no man can have two masters, so which is it? This is what he said: my belief in Israel is unshakable. I'm proud of the key role Conservative Friends of Israel play within our party. And I'm going to say, if you follow through what this man has done, then Cameron's Syrian regime change policy is actually Israeli policy. And have we got more evidence to really say this? Well, let's have a look at a few old faces. We had Malcolm Rifkin, who was chair of the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee, Conservative Friend of Israel. William Hague as Foreign Secretary, Conservative Friend of Israel. And of course, good old David Cameron there in the driving seat. Are they British politicians? I don't think they are. I think these people are absolute traitors, and they're working to the agenda of a foreign power. If you're not convinced with that, let's remind ourselves that Francis Maude, with no real debate in Parliament, certainly no consultation of the British public, has now set up a massive integrated collaboration between British and Israeli intelligence and defence agencies, which includes universities. So presumably fairly shortly, we'll be able to get the children through those revitalised grammar schools and straight into what Israeli defence organisations. So British politicians, no, they support Israel. And can we really get this home to people? Well, here is Conservative Friends of Israel magazine proudly boasting a very young, he's almost a boy there, isn't he, Mike? He's the boy. We said he would be Prime Minister, the words of
Michael Heseltine.
Michael Heseltine.
Yeah.
And there he is, getting his instructions from the Israelis. Can't have two masters. So this man was working for Israel. And then if we look inside the brochure, well, we got David Cameron. We got Francis Maude. No surprise he set up that integration. We got William Hague. He helped kickstart the wars. We've got Liam Fox, up to his neck in dirty defence deals. We've got Sajid Javid. And of course, we shouldn't forget the man manipulating the money, George Osborne. So they're all British politicians, but actually they support Israel. David, any comments from you?
Yes, a couple. The situation in the United States is even worse in some ways because you have dual citizens. You have dual citizenship of the United States and of Israel, and some of the people with that dual citizenship have very key positions of power in the United States administration. The idea that there's a conflict of interest there seems to be ignored, but clearly there must be. And those people with dual citizenship include Philip Zelikow, the man who arranged, organised and orchestrated the 9/11 Commission, and who controlled exactly what was in and what was not in their report and the official investigation into 9/11. If anyone wants any more proof, it's as though more proof was needed, that there is an agenda here which is working against the interests of the people of this country. I would also point to General Wesley Clark, who just after 9/11 was in the Pentagon speaking to former subordinates, and one said, I just got this down from upstairs. He was meaning the Secretary of Defence's office, said today, and there's a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. So that was the agenda. That was the agenda right the way back from the early part of this millennium, and that's the agenda that this country has also been following. Whose interest is this in? Not ours, not the Middle East.
That group of countries is very interesting because obviously they haven't met their 5-year time frame, but nonetheless, the comments that Brian was talking about earlier, they're from Michael Fallon. Those were coming out of a conference on peacekeeping that has been going on in the last couple of days, and of course today the United Kingdom has just announced that they are sending more British troops to Sudan for peacekeeping duties. So this is another country on the list which has been completely demolished as a nation by interference rather than peacekeeping from foreign countries.
Yes, indeed, and we're seeing the ominous idea that we're going to go after Iran, which is a populous country, a well-defended country, and a country with considerable resources to defend itself, which must rate as utter recklessness and disinterested, a lack of interest in simply preserving human life. I mean, there is no valid reason for doing any of this. There's no valid reason for going after Iran, other than financial reasons, oil-related reasons, and reasons of power. But there's no reason of national defence or of the essential self-interest of our nation.
Okay, let's move on then to Brexit, because of course this psychological operation continues. And here we have the Financial Times. May tells Tusk UK wants smooth EU divorce. Well, this was a meeting that the pair of them had yesterday, the first formal bilateral meeting, as they describe it, to discuss preparations for withdrawal from the European Union and plans for the October European Council meeting. And Theresa May said it was going to be important to work together with Tusk to make sure that the Brexit is as smooth as possible. She said the UK would take time to prepare for the negotiations, reiterating that Article 50 won't happen until after the end of the year. She apparently reassured Mr. Tusk that while the UK remains a member for the European Union, we will continue to be a strong player and a strong voice within the organisation. So we will meet our obligations. We will meet our the things we need to do as members and so on. And of course, she promoted free trade because Britain has decided that it is pushing all the various, or it's going to push as many free trade deals as it can possibly push, using Brexit as the excuse. Well, what did Donald Tusk have to say? Well, he headed off to Latvia today, and he had to say that I know that Brexit is a particular concern for Latvia, as so many of your citizens reside in the UK. Our goal is clear: to establish the best possible relations between the EU and the UK. It's obvious that once negotiations begin, Securing the rights of EU citizens in the UK will be a key objective for us, and it's equally clear that our future relationship with the UK requires a balance of rights and obligations. And he was talking about the 4 freedoms. So he said a new deal between the European Union and the United Kingdom must strike a balance between rights and obligations. Access to the single market can be granted only if the 4 basic freedoms are respected. And those freedoms are the free movement of people, the free movement of goods, the free movement of services, and the free movement of capital. So, of course, if the terms, Brian and David, if the terms of Brexit are that those 4 freedoms, as he's describing them, continue, then whether we're nominally in or out makes no difference whatsoever.
So if you don't, just take the borders. If a nation state can't control its own borders, technically it doesn't exist as a nation state. So that one alone, of course, says exactly what's going on here. And this has been why successive governments will not talk about the question of immigration. And every time we mention immigration, of course, so many people feel so passionate about that. But let's put the extra bit in that we need to remember, of course, that the migration of people, those individuals, those families are being used as a weapon in order to help this political agenda. So to get to the root of what's actually happening, why are so many people on the move? Well, they're on the move because of economic problems or wars. And those very problems have been created by the politicians who say, well, we must keep the borders open. So this is not about nationality. It's not about people's colour. This is about a very callous, cynical political agenda, which is to destroy nation states in order to build this supranational European Union stepping stone to a world government, I think.
Okay, and sticking with European issues, this from Business Insider. The headline is Brussels is moving closer towards creating an EU army post-Brexit. Well, we have been warning about this. The UK column has been warning about this for a very long time now. And again, if you are a UK column member and you haven't yet seen the episode of Insight that we did on this issue, then please go and have a look before it is made available to the wider public. This is another comment from Jean-Claude Juncker, who continues to put pressure on for this, and he's going to set out his continuing plans for. And of course, this is not about an EU army. This is about full European military integration and with foreign policy as well. And of course, our point is that if you have military integration, you then have to have a sort of central budget that supports that, and so you're looking at
Treasury
as well as a Foreign Office.
Can I just add in there, Mike, and of course, as you watch the British military absolutely savaged, cut to pieces by successive governments, this now means that with the illusion of Brexit, UK is now sitting on the edge, decimated military, can't act on its own. If it acts with Europe, it's effectively back in the pot with the European Union. So,
and of course, that is the intention.
That is the intention. Brexit, a complete illusion, a psychological operation, which is what UK column labelled it many months ago.
Indeed. David, have you any thoughts on that?
I liked I thought it was very interesting, the list of the 4 freedoms, because there's a bit of sleight of hand going on there. 3 of those freedoms, goods, services and capital moving around, are very similar, and they're based on consent. Right? They're based on somebody wanting to sell and presumably voluntarily agreeing to trade, and somebody somewhere else wanting to buy. Under those circumstances, national borders have very little to do with the situation. You can have that freedom. You don't compromise anything. You don't compromise liberty. But people of this revolutionary form of technology called legs, people can move across borders without anyone on the other side of the border consenting or wanting them to, and that makes it very different. You can't have open borders and maintain a nation. It's not possible to do so. So there's a big sleight of hand here between free trade, which benefits everybody, and free movement, which means social disruption and a great deal of strife.
which is the agenda.
Yes, indeed.
This is the turbulence in order to allow the change agenda to work. First, you've got to destabilise organisations and countries, and then you can push through the change, the transformation agenda. It makes sense.
Absolutely. Now, of course, part of that transformation agenda has been constitutional change, constitutional reform, and at the heart of the constitutional reform agenda in this country is devolution. Well, in fact, it goes beyond that as well, because UK Column has been saying for quite some time that the intention was to completely remove the influence and remove the central government of this country. Now, the fact that central government is not operating as it should is neither here nor there, really. When we talk about the constitutional arrangements that we have in this country, it's a different conversation. But we've been saying that Parliament would be closed effectively, and that's pretty much what seems to be happening here. Both houses of Parliament will have to leave the Palace of Westminster for 6 years under a plan to be put forward by MPs, as according to Politics Home. And they're saying that the project is going to cost billions, 4 billion to 7 billion, depending on whether they try to stay in the building or not. But the way that the whole constitutional reform agenda is going, the way that city-states are being established, regional authorities are being established, in 6 years' time, if they're out of that place for 6 years, it's highly unlikely they're going to go back.
Well, in my opinion, Mike, they certainly won't go back. But a number of things here. Has anybody seen any structural reports which show this scale of problem with the building? Because my mind says, well, if there's £7 billion of work that's needed, nobody should be in that building now, because apparently it's about to implode on itself, similar to 9/11. So that's one question. But I've got to say credit to David Nokes, because David Nokes, when he was working with the UK Column, was the man who said he predicted that there would be an excuse created in order to say that they had to move out of Westminster. So if you're watching, David, you're absolutely right, spot on the money in a most incredible way.
And that must have been about 10 years ago.
Well, it was some years ago. So, and of course, you're right. We're talking about city regions. When the British government, to use the inclusive expression, is moved out of London, what are you left with? You're left with the EU city region, which they were trying to achieve in the first place. But David, structures, is this building about to, topple over sideways, presumably?
Well, I don't actually know what's the matter with it, because there's not really been anything in the technical press that I've seen that's been illustrating why we need how much? Billions? It's a vast sum. Now, I'm sure there'll be stonework decay issues. I'm sure that the plumbing and the heating needs a massive overhaul, and there may be a bit of underpinning. But that's a huge sum, and it seems very questionable.
Yes. What can we say?
I think it's pretty obvious what's going on is what we can say.
Yes, okay, let's move on to Scottish issues and the independence referendum version 2. Not to be naive, the political and legal basis is not in place, according to Jim Sillars.
Looking at facts, legalities, and looking at things with some precision. He's almost the only major politician in the nationalist side who's actually approaching problems with that degree of thoughtfulness, and is a real breath of fresh air compared to the majority of them. There are a few other grandees within the party who are pointing out the huge limitations of the current approach. No one in power is listening, but he's obviously having an effect in getting a point of view across here. Now, the issue is there is no legal basis for a second independence referendum. It requires permission from Westminster to be held. It's not legal for it to be held on Holyrood's authority alone. There is no demand within the nation. There is no discussion within the nation, really. And what this is a means of keeping the nationalist bandwagon on the road, means of keeping the support behind the current nationalist administration for short-term political reasons. And as Jim Sillars points out, It lacks any far-sightedness, statesmanship, or wisdom, and will come unstuck.
Okay, and well, this is a bit unusual because here we have Nicola Sturgeon, according to the Telegraph, preparing for Scottish independence referendum bill that could be tabled instantly. Can we just put that one up, please, Theo? So Nicola Sturgeon prepares for Scottish independence referendum bill that could be tabled instantly, and yet in The Guardian, they must have a different set of journalists saying that she's shelving plans for a quick...
Yes, and this refers to exactly the same events and exactly the same statements from Nicola Sturgeon. So confusion seems to reign. So here's the plan, Mike. We're going to have a referendum bill, but we're not. Are you with me so far?
No.
We're going to write one, right? And we're going to get everyone involved who wants to be involved, and we're going to write this referendum bill, and then we're going to put it on a shelf. And it's going to sit on the shelf until the time is right. And when the time is right, it will come off the shelf, we'll blow the dust off it, and it'll be instantaneously before Parliament, so we can move really fast. So there we go. We are going to have a referendum bill, and we're not. This seems to be very much the pattern with Scottish politics, that every question has two answers, yes and no.
Yes, indeed. Okay, well, of course, another area that seems to have two answers, as we're going to come on to, is the named person scheme. But before we get onto it in detail, where did this come from? This is a poll, which is... So
it's people who have gone onto the Scotsman website and expressed an opinion. But the question was, do we scrap the named person scheme? And you see 93% of 1,000 people who voted at this point when I voted, 93% against 7% said, yes, scrap it, it's rubbish. So that gives some indication of how disastrously the whole named person scheme has gone for the administration in Holyrood. Several things happened yesterday. Firstly, it was announced that there would be a consultation, an intense consultation, by the Scottish Government, talking to lots of people, including some opponents of the scheme, in order to work out how they're going to change it to make it comply with the Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which it currently doesn't. Now, there was a brief debate of about half an hour on this, and it was quite interesting and quite depressing. There were many things about it that were wrong and troubling. The idea that that the government is trying to put forward is that this just needs a tweak, a minor alteration. It's details. They're trying to hold that line for political reasons. No one's buying it. It's clearly nonsense. If you look at this next slide here, you've got the No to Name Person campaign answering the statements made by Mr. Swinney in Holyrood.
So he has said, Swinney has said the Supreme Court defeat, quote, does not require current policy to change, and it, quote, vindicated the Parliament vote for the named person legislation. And your spokesperson for No to Name Person, Simon Calvert, said this would be laughable if it were not so offensive to the parents whose human rights were so cavalierly ignored in the drafting of the named person law.
Yes, and in the 1984 world of Scottish politics, vindicated is now the word that means we were completely trashed. We lost hugely. There is a tendency for Mr. Swinney to repeat in a wooden manner the history of the legal challenges, because it went to 2 legal challenges in Scotland before it went to the Supreme Court. And he views the failure of the Scottish courts to spot the blatant and naked totalitarianism of this policy, of this act, as somehow vindicating his position, rather than being an indictment of the Scottish courts themselves. It's a little bit like watching the old sketch from the Day-to-Day, where the pool attendant describes how in most years no one died, but one year in the middle of the night someone died. It just doesn't seem to compute with Mr. Swinney what the implications of this are. He then said, and I'm still trying to get over the stupidity of this, he then said that he would paraphrase the Supreme Court's judgment, and that what they were looking for was the guidance documents that the Scottish Government issued to be enshrined into primary legislation. Now, this is most certainly not what the Supreme Court had in mind, because the Supreme Court had all of those guidance documents and reviewed them all, and that's why they were talking about totalitarian states, and what totalitarian states tend to do is to go first for the children, to get control of the next generation. So we've got someone who's in denial, who doesn't seem to have a firm grasp of the nature of the enormous problems that confront him. And there was other issues that again were quite worrying. He was talking about the problem of definitions, right? Someone raised the point that there's no definition of well-being, and he claimed that there was a definition in the guidance document. This is nonsense. Now, if you see this next slide here,
just pause for it.
Just keep talking for a second, David. I just need to make one quick typographical change.
But we'll come to a comment here. Yes, this is Nick Marks, right? So he is creator of the Happy Planet Index. He's the guru of well-being. And this is what he said in a Radio 4 interview. Well-being is not a beach you go and lie on. It's a sort of dynamic dance, and there's movement in that all the time. And actually, it's the functionality of that movement which actually is true levels of well-being. So there you go. That's the definition. It is nonsense. It's incoherent tripe. And Mr. Swinney is thinking he can put this into primary legislation. What he's done, he said he's going to delay it for a year while he talks to everyone and sorts out the big tweak. It was a very troubling performance by Mr. Swinney. And one other point I would like to raise, because it's got wider implications. Tavish Scott raised the issue that there was no opt-out, that people saying no to this would be targeted by the very system, because by saying no to the named person, you are somehow suspicious, right? That would generate further inquiry. Mr. Swinney said that the opt-out wasn't clearly understood enough. Now, there is no opt-out. The government's own lawyer said that to put an opt-out in would defeat the purposes of the scheme. He said that to the Supreme Court. So Mr. Swinney appears to be lying there. But he then went on to basically suggest that the authority of Parliament, the democratic integrity or democratic motivation of Parliament must be recognised by people. Now, this is a very worrying thing to say, and I may add thoroughly anti-Scottish, because it's quite clear that the people are sovereign, not Parliament. They work for us, not us for them. And if they pass a piece of legislation that we think is garbage and throw in the bin, it is, under Scots law, not law. And Mr. Swinney needs to recognise that.
Yeah. Okay, look, David, we're completely out of time, so we want to finish on the Doherty case, but we need to keep this pretty quick and to the point. First of all, you wanted to highlight that we now have a positive identification on the policeman who came to the door of the Dohertys originally. Yes.
The man that the Dohertys believed to be Sergeant Sam Buchan, we pointed out last week that wasn't Sergeant Sam Buchan. It was in fact Sergeant Gilbert or Gibby Buchan. So this is the man who came to the door. This is the man that presumably altered the reports. This is the man who's got a lot of questions to answer.
Okay. And we'll just highlight the Doherty Files section on the UK Column website if anybody wants to have a look at it. And also the interview that Brian did with the Dohertys, the video interview that Brian did with the Dohertys, an episode of Inside Vox, is on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to distribute that as far and wide as possible. It's also on the Doherty Files page on the UK Column website. And if you, we just want to remind people to write to the child. Just remind us about Tulsa and this.
Yes, we're asking people to write to the court because the courts are not defending the Dohertys' position here. They're conspiring with Tulsa to seize their children. So here's the address here: Clerk of the District Court, Letterkenny Courthouse, Court Office, Courthouse, Letterkenny, County Donegal, Republic of Ireland. If you could write to that address and point out that the Dohertys who have done nothing wrong require to have their children returned forthwith, without any delay and without any conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so I'll just bring in this one very quickly because I was intrigued to see an article in the Mail. It was talking about the child abuse inquiry, Alexis J, and there was this interesting quote. It said, "I would like to reassure any victim or survivor who is concerned that their experience may be excluded from our work that I have no intention of asking the Home Secretary to revise or reduce our terms of reference." So I gave the inquiry a call and I said, does that mean you are saying that nobody who has been abused will be rejected by the inquiry? The media team were unable to tell me what that statement really meant, and they are going to double check and come back to me. But of course, it's very interesting. Melanie Shaw, effectively in solitary segregation. She's been threatened in prison. She's having a particularly unpleasant time. And why is she there? Because, of course, she's not only a survivor, but she knows details, facts, and she knows names. And she has stated on several occasions that abusers included high-level members of the British government. So, serious times. And David, would you just like to give us a concluding remark on any of the topics we've covered?
One further thing, we're looking to have a get-together with all the people who support and follow the UK column in Scotland, who have been working on either the Doherty case or the Holly Gregg case, and we're looking for that to be the last Wednesday of September. There will be a guest speaker and there will be a venue, and we'll announce that next week.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And before we close, I'll say a very big thank you to the people that have been helping in the Doherty case. And we had a communication from a person who's offering some particular support, which I will arrange. So thank you very much for doing that. But I will also say, do remember that when we get involved in these cases, communications with the people who are suffering can sometimes be very difficult and sometimes slow, and this means that it isn't as simple as sitting down on a daily basis with people who've got problems. It is often a lot more complex than that. But there we are. So for the weekend, how can you help? Research is good. It must be accurate. You must check your facts. Don't assume somebody is the individual that you're chasing because they have the right name. Many people share exactly the same names, and you must be careful of what you're doing. But are we seeing an effect from the public investigation in regard to the Doherty case? We are, and as you said, I think it was yesterday, Mike, isn't it interesting that Police Scotland have suddenly decided to have a big public crackdown on paedophiles and child abusers, except presumably in the government? Well, there we are. Thanks for joining us. We will be back on Monday. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.